And the next part will be, the next thing will be looking into the UiPath Studio components. So some of the components that you interact with while building an automation. Then we're going to have a hands-on practice and finally a Q&A session. So probably for some of you here, this could be the first time you're hearing of the term RPA or robotic process automation. So what better place to start than to understand what RPA is. So RPA is a technology, and what this technology does is it enables a software program, which in this context is a software robot, to mimic human interactions with various applications in a computer in order to accomplish required tasks and meet specific objectives. So some of the human interactions that these software robots can mimic include keyboard inputs, that is typing into a keyboard, mouse movements and clicks, and also reading the computer screen. So of course, there are more human interactions that the software robots can mimic, but these are just some of the common ones. So in case you need to understand better what robotic process automation is, you can access the resources in UiPath Academy or in the previous Africa Series 1, that is the introduction in getting started with Studio X. So the first thing we'll do is we're going to see how you can install UiPath Studio. So for installing UiPath Studio, you do this through the official website. And when you go to the official website, the first thing that you have to do is you have to create a UiPath Automation Cloud account. So throughout your working with UiPath Studio, you're always going to be using your UiPath Automation Cloud account. And once you've created the UiPath Automation Cloud account, the next thing you'll do is to download UiPath Studio. Then once you've downloaded it, that is the installer, it's going to prompt you to sign in to the UiPath Automation Cloud that you have created from Studio. Then once you have signed in, you're going to choose the UiPath Studio profile, and there you go, you're going to be ready to start developing your first process. So I'll just show you the official website where you can download it from. And here it is. So when you come to the official website, you'll just come here to try UiPath free. Then when you click it, it will ask you or prompt you to sign in. If you don't have an UiPath Automation Cloud account yet, you're going to create one. Then once you create it and you filled in all the details that you need to fill in, it will sign you into the UiPath Automation Cloud. So I already have an account, so I'll just continue with my account, select my account. So once you're in UiPath Automation Cloud, you'll click here. On the far right-hand side, you'll see a download button, which will immediately begin downloading the UiPath Studio installer. Then once you've downloaded and run the installer, immediately you open the UiPath Studio. This is going to be the first interface you see. And up here, there are a couple of components and a couple of features that we are going to now dive deeper and look into. So that is about installing UiPath Studio. In case you get stuck at any point while installing UiPath Studio, you can find more resources in the UiPath documentation under the installation and upgrade section. So now we are going to look at how you can navigate UiPath Studio. So like I mentioned, once you've installed UiPath Studio, there are a couple of features that you're going to see for the very first time when you're going to open UiPath Studio. So up here on the left-hand side, we have a list of the recent projects that you will have done. So in case you've been developing some projects recently, they are all going to appear here. And then up here, the top left corner, we have two options. One is open a local project. So if you have a project saved on your computer, you'll be able to open it using that option. So once you click there, it will open for you the file explorer, and then you navigate to where you've saved your project, then you can open it. And then the next option we have is clone or checkout. So ideally what this option enables you to do is to manage your code source control. That is on Git or any other code source control platforms. So ideally this option facilitates collaboration within teams. Then on the right-hand side, we have several kinds of projects or several types of projects that you can create in UiPath Studio. And I'm going to look into some of the common ones. So some of the common types of projects that you can create in UiPath Studio is a process project, a library project, a test automation project, a template project, or a robotic enterprise framework project. So for a process project, ideally this type of project enables you to create a project from scratch. So you start from a blank or a clean slate. Then the other type of project that we have is a library project. And for a library project, here you can create reusable components that other members, let's say, for example, if you're working within a team, so other members of the team can use some of the reusable components that you have created, and you can also use some of the reusable components they have created. So that is a library project. It enables you to do that. So that also adds on to collaboration in teams. The next type of project is a test automation project. So as most of us here know, or we all know, when an application or a system is developed, once the development process is done, there has to be some testing done. And testing is done on the basis of test cases. So a test automation project enables you to automate test processes of any application or system that has been developed. And it does this by executing the test cases that have been created for the testing process of that application or system. And the other type of project we have is a template project. And like the word suggests, this type of project enables you to start creating a project from a pre-configured automation. Like you don't have to start from scratch. So it kind of gives you a blueprint where you can start from. And this enables you to speed up your development process. The other type of project, and this type of project is particularly common in large-scale automations, is the robotic enterprise framework. And ideally, this is the best type of project that you should use to create processes that are meant for large-scale deployment. So here we are talking about complex projects or complex kind of automations. So this is the type of project that you'd use to create that kind of a project where there's a complex automation or large-scale deployment required. So now we've understood some of the common projects, types of projects that are there on UiPath Studio. The next thing that we are going to look into is how you can create a new project in UiPath Studio. So you have already installed your UiPath Studio, and you've seen some of the common types of projects that you can create. So to create a project in Studio, let's say we want to create a blank project. You'd come here to process and click on process, then it will open for you a pop-up where you give more details about the project. So the first input is the name. So you can give your project a name. And here, that's entirely up to you. Whichever name you decide to give to your process, you can define it here. Then the second input is location. So here you define where you want to save your project. So by default, all projects are created and saved in the UiPath folder within your computer. That is where the default UiPath folder path is. And then the next input is description. So you've given the name of your project, you've given the location. So you probably want to give more details about what your process does. So here is where you get the opportunity to do that. So that's where you give more description and more details about it. Then compatibility. Here we have a drop down that has three options. We have Windows, we have cross-platform, and we have Windows Legacy. So Windows mostly accommodates the most recent operating systems. Windows Legacy caters for the old operating systems, and cross-platform basically cuts across both Windows and Windows Legacy. Then you have either, for the language, you have either VB.NET or C#. So mostly you'll be creating your projects in VB.NET language, because even in the community platform, there are more resources and more support for projects created with that particular language. So that's how you create a new project. So once you've created your new project, you're going to land into the dashboard of UiPath Studio. And on the dashboard of UiPath Studio, we have several components, and some of the main components that we have here is the top ribbon panel. At least that's how I prefer calling it. Then we have on the left side, we have the activities panel. On the right side, we have the properties panel. And at the very bottom, we have the output panel. So we are going to dive deeper and look into each of these main components and what they entail. So before I go to the first component, which is the ribbon panel, I'll open up the dashboard so that you can see the main components that I've just talked about. So here it is. So the ribbon panel is this up here. The left-hand side, we have the activities panel right here. Then at the very bottom, we have the output panel, which of course you can minimize and maximize depending on your preference. Then on the right-hand side, we have the properties panel. So now let's go deeper and see what each of these components entail. So the first component is the ribbon panel. And the ribbon panel ideally consists of three tabs. The first tab is the home tab, second tab is the design tab, and the third tab is the debug tab. So what the home tab does is it redirects you to UiPath Studio's starting point. And I'll show you an illustration of that. So here are the tabs I'm talking about. We have the home tab, the design tab, and the debug tab. So the home tab, when you click on it, it takes you back to the starting point of UiPath Studio. That is when you open UiPath Studio, what you see. So ideally, the home tab facilitates or enables the user to go back and probably create a new project or a new process, or access another project in their computer, or access settings, tools, or any other options that you'd like. Probably you want to change some configuration with the UiPath Studio, install some extensions, and so on and so forth. So that is what the home tab does. And then we have the design tab. So the design tab is the main workspace where users design and create automation workflows. So Throughout your interaction with UiPath Studio, when you're developing automation, this is the main tab that you'll mostly find yourself using. So it's your main workspace. And here it is. It has several components, several features or if you wish to call them functionalities that you can use while developing your process. And we'll look into each one of them at a high level. And the third tab that we have in the ribbon panel is the debug tab. So, in every development process, while developing, you have to test your process, you have to debug. In case of any errors, you'd also like to troubleshoot. So this tab enables you to access features and options that would allow you to test your process, troubleshoot any errors that you come across, or debug to find any errors that could be in your process. So here it is. We also have a couple of features and options in the debug tab. So we are going to look at each of them at a high level view. So we'll start off with the design tab. So as you've seen up there, and as I've mentioned, there are several features and functions that you can access when you click on the design tab. And I've highlighted some of them. I've highlighted all of them actually here with a brief explanation of what each one of them does. So the first one in that panel, the first ones in that panel is the new functionality, save functionality, exporters, and debug file functionalities. So these four functionalities, in summary, help you to create, save, and execute the project that you're developing. Then the second one, we have cut, copy, and paste activities. I'm sure we are all familiar with cut, copy, and pasting functions. So you can also do that in UiPath Studio. So when you drag and drop your activities, probably you'd like to copy an activity to another workflow. You can use the copy option or the cut option and the paste option. The other functionalities we have in the design tab is undo or redo actions. I'm sure we are also familiar with what these actions do. So let's say you dragged and dropped an activity. Let's say you've created a new variable or something, or you've just done something while developing your process. And let's say you didn't intend to do them. You can easily undo or redo your actions while developing on UiPath Studio. So the other functionality we have is manage packages. So ideally what this option enables you to do is to install dependencies for your automation workflow. So while building your process, you'll realize that there are several dependencies you need. For instance, mail activities. Let's say you're building your process and your software robot is meant to probably retrieve some information from an email account or send an email to another email account. So one of the dependencies you need for this is mail activities. And here in manage packages option, you can install dependencies and install dependencies, upgrade them, and so on and so forth. And we also have an official marketplace where you can go and search for other dependencies that you'd like to include in your project. And this option can be accessed from the manage packages option. The other option we have is manage entities. So basically what this functionality helps you to do is it helps you to handle and organize various entities or elements in your project. So for instance, some of the entities we have in our project are things like variables and arguments. So those are examples of entities. Elements we'd have is activities that you drag and drop and things like that. The next option we have in the design tab is the test manager. So what the test manager helps you to do or helps the user to do in this case is to manage and execute automation test cases. The other option we have in the design tab is the recording app, the app or web recorder. And what this option enables the user to do is to record actions on the desktop app or web. So for instance, you're automating a certain website. So what you can do and what UiPath Studio enables you to do is to record an action. You click this option and then you go to the browser website that you're trying to automate and ideally record what you'd like the bot to do when it goes to that website. For instance, clicking a button or typing into a given input and so on and so forth. The next option we have is computer vision. So under computer vision, what this option enables us to do is things like screen scraping, that is retrieving data from the screen, image recognition, recognizing some images, and OCR, which is optical character recognition. The other option we have on the design tab is capturing user events. And what this option enables you to do is it enables you to capture keyboard and mouse events. So ideally, you can click on this option and you can record probably the type into activity on your keyboard and so on and so forth. The other option we have is table extraction. So table extraction, like the word suggests, is it enables you to extract tabular data from unstructured sources. So unstructured sources are things like websites, also applications. So table extraction allows you to extract data from those sources like websites, applications, and store that data in a data table that you can use in another activity. The other option we have is the UI Explorer. So what the UI Explorer enables you to do is to modify and validate selectors. So when you drag and drop an activity, for example, type into activity, you can indicate an element on a browser or an application, and those elements you indicate have selectors. So you can modify and validate selectors, check if the selectors work, also check how accurate they are. So that option enables you to do that. The other option you have in the design tab is remove unused. So this option helps you or makes it easier for you to remove unused variables, dependencies, workflows, etc. So you'd find yourself in situations whereby you've built a very complex process which has so many files, so many workflows, and it would be difficult to go to each and every workflow, removing the activities, variables, and some of the dependencies that you have that are unused. So this option does that for you in a single click. The other option we have is analyze file. So what analyze file option does is it enables the user to check for validation errors or any violations. So a process cannot execute unless all the validation checks have passed. So for you to check whether your project has any validation errors, you can use this option, the analyze file option, to check for those validation errors. The next option we have, the design tab, is export to Excel. And as the word suggests, this option enables the user to export data or a workflow to an Excel file. Then the last option we have in the design tab is the publish tab or the publish option. So once you've done building your project and it's ready for deployment, ideally you'd use this option to publish your project to Orchestrator, which you'd now then deploy from Orchestrator. I'm sure some of us probably are not aware of what the Orchestrator server is. So there'll be a future session on that is going to dive deeper into what Orchestrator is and what you can do on Orchestrator. But in summary, it helps you to manage your deployments, deploy new processes, and yeah, just monitor how your deployed processes are doing. So the other tab, which is the last tab in the ribbon panel that we have, is the debug tab. So you'd find yourself interacting with the options in this tab a lot. And this tab, the options in this tab ideally help you to debug your process. That is, find any errors that are there in your project, troubleshoot any errors that you have, and also just help you to manage any unexpected outcomes that you might come across while executing your project. So I like to group this option into 3 different groups. So the first group is the run group. The second group is the debug group. And the last group, which only has one option, is the logs group. So we look into each of the groups at a high level. So the first group, which is the run group, has 2 options. So the first option is debug file. And what debug file helps you to do is it helps you to execute or debug the project that you're currently working on. So you've added your activities, probably want to see how your activities execute. You'd use this option to execute that project and debug to see whether there are any errors. The other option we have in the run group is stop, and like the word suggests, it helps the user to stop an executing process. So let's say a process is executing, you'd like to stop it, you'd use that option to do that. So in the next group, which carries most of the options in the design tab, in the debug tab, is the debug group. So here is where you have all your debug activities, your debug options. So here you can go into more detail, specifying how exactly you'd like to debug your project. So the first options we have, which I'll discuss as a group, is step into, step over, and step out. So these options help you to check your execution step by step. So you'd like to see how each activity works. So these options help you to do that. The next option we have is retry. So what retry option helps the user to do is to re-execute the current activity. Ignore option is the next option we have. And the ignore option, what it does is it enables the execution, the exception in an execution to be ignored, and the execution process to continue. So let's say the process is executing, run into an exception, which in other words, we like to call them errors. So you'd use this option to help the bot to ignore that error or that exception and move on with the execution process. The other option you have is restart. And restart helps you to restart from the very first activity. So your workflow has executed from the first activity. Let's say you have 10 activities in your workflow. So the restart option helps you to go back. Let's say the execution had reached at the 7th option, for instance. So the restart option helps you to go back to the very first activity and start executing from there, moving forward. The next option is focus. So focus option helps you to focus on a particular execution point. So it focuses on a particular activity that is executing at a given time. We also have breakpoints. So you can define breakpoints in your execution process or in your workflow. So assuming you want to execute your process, but you don't want to execute the entire process from the beginning all the way to the end. So what you can do, at the point at which you want the execution to pause, you can define a breakpoint at that point or at that activity. And when your process executes, it's going to pause at that point, and you can be able to continue the execution process from there or move on with your execution. So the other option you have is a slow step. So slow step, what it does is it enables the debugging process to go at a slower speed. So what software robots do is they execute very fast, and ideally that's the whole or one of the objectives of building a software robot is to help processes execute faster. So the slow step helps the process to debug slowly. Let's say you want to see how each activity executes. So you'll use slow step to reduce the speed at which each activity executes. Maybe you want to look at how the activity is executing, and slow step will help you to do that. The other option is execution trail. And as the name suggests, is it helps you track the execution process of each activity. The other option we have is highlight elements. So when your activities are executing, this option, when it's enabled, offers the user various highlighting options. So it highlights each activity as it executes and highlights if an activity falls, it highlights it in a different color. If it passes, it highlights it in another different color. Log activities is the next option we have. And what log activities does is it helps you to include log messages, which can show you either errors or other information that you have while executing your process. So you can see the errors that are there. Let's say your project execution has failed. So a log message will help you to see where that error is, and you'll be able to fix it or troubleshoot it from there. Other information is just other information related to your execution process, and we are going to see that in one of the processes that we are going to run in our hands-on session. The next option is continue on exception, and this is in many ways similar to the ignore option that we spoke about earlier. So ideally what it helps you do is it helps you handle an exception while the process is executing, and then it doesn't stop at that exception. It continues with the execution without stopping. So the other option we have is a picture-in-picture option. And what picture-in-picture option does is it helps you or helps the user who's developing a process to run attended automations while still working on your computer. So you don't have to sit back and wait for the attended robot to execute. So because an attended robot ideally needs to have the interface in view in order to run or execute. So what picture-in-picture does is it enables you to still continue working on your other things while the bot runs. So the other option we have is remote debugging. So what remote debugging enables you to do is to run and debug attended and unattended processes on robots deployed on remote machines, so virtual environments, for instance. Then the other option we have is profile execution. So when this option is active, what it does is it implements execution timing data collection and displays all that data at the end of subsequent runs. Then the final option we have in the debug tab is open logs. So what open logs option does is it opens the execution logs of the project. So all the errors or information that the process outputs while running, the open logs option enables you to access all those logs and basically see how your process has been executing. So the other panel we have is the activity panel. And the activity panel contains all activities required to automate a workflow. So while building your process, a process is basically a collection of activities, and this is where you can access them from. So the activities are added to the workflow through a drag and drop kind of way, so you don't have to program each and every one of them. And the other panel we have is the properties panel. So remember, we've just spoken about activities. So each of these activities has other settings or configurations that you can add to them. So to access the settings and configurations of each activity, you'd use the properties panel to do that. So as you can see here, I have a message box activity there. When it's highlighted, on the properties panel, you can see the various properties that you can adjust. For instance, the message you want it to output, one of them there called the text property, and other properties as well. So activities do have that, like you can configure them to do different things depending on your particular use case. And then the final panel that we have on our interface is the output panel. So the output panel provides you with real-time feedback of information and messages during the execution of automation workflows. So the logs that we stated earlier, the logs containing errors or any extra information that is outputted when your process is executing, they all show here and it's in real time. So while your process is executing, you will see the logs here in the output panel in real time. And we will see that shortly in the hands-on practice that we do. So finally, we are on the hands-on practice part. So for the hands-on practice, I have a use case or a problem statement. So for the problem statement you're going to work with today is we want to create a simple project that will get 10 customer names generated randomly from that website, the fake name generator website. And then those names and other details should be extracted from that website and then populated in an Excel file. Then we want the bot to send that Excel file via email once it's done. So we have a high-level overview of what the process should do here in this flowchart. So once it starts, the bot should go to that website. Then it should copy the details from that website, enter it in a data row within a data table, and it's going to loop this a number of times. In this case, for our problem statement, we want 10 customer names. So it's going to loop through 10 times. So it's going to go to the website, pick the details, and do this 10 times while writing the details in an Excel file. So once it's done writing all the details in an Excel file, ideally the bot should now send that email to someone. So this entire process will be done by the bot. And in preparation for this session, I built the process beforehand so that we can see it executing in real time. So in UiPath Studio, we have the main workflow. So the main workflow is where most of your high-level activities will be. And then of course, you'd have other workflows, and the other workflows, you can have them within other workflows. As you work with UiPath Studio, you learn most of these things. Like you can add workflows within other workflows. So the main workflow is where your bot or your project will start executing from while it goes into the other workflows. So like I mentioned earlier, here, you can get your activities from here. As you can see already from my main workflow, there are some activities that I have added. So we have the input dialog activity, the build data table activity, assign activity. So all these activities, you can get them from the activities panel. So there are some which are displayed there, and you can also search for them. For instance, the input dialog activity, I can just search it here. So once I type input, it's going to give me suggestions. So there's the input dialog activity, custom input, and so on. So you can search for an activity from there. Then you can drag and drop it onto your workflow, just like that. So I'll delete that. Okay, so I built the process beforehand, so I want us to see how it executes. Or before we execute it, I'd like to take you through what each of these activities do. So in an activity, you have the name of the activity, which you can change by simply double clicking on the name. So you can adjust the name of the activity, rename it, or you can use the shortcut F2. Then we also have annotations in an activity. So annotations give a better description about the activity. So for instance, the input dialog activity, what it does here is it takes the input from the user, and you can change your description by simply double clicking or using the shortcut control F2. So like I mentioned, you have the properties of each activity. So for instance, this input dialog activity, we have these properties that are related to it. So we have the input. So here in the input, we have several activities. We can, for instance, define the name of our label input, can define the title of the input dialog. We can define where we want the result to be stored in. So the result, we'd like it to be stored in a variable. A variable is like a container. So it stores some data temporarily to be used at a later stage. So here we've defined a variable called number. And we'll come to the variables panel. Have the variable, can define the variable type. So some variable types we have is integer, string. You can also define the scope. So here for this example, our variable number, its scope is the main sequence, which is up here. So we also have arguments. Arguments are also similar to variables. And arguments, what you can do with them is you can use them to move data from one workflow to another. Then we have imports. Here you can import various packages and dependencies for that particular file that you're trying to execute. Okay. So first thing the bot is going to do is it's going to give you an input dialog where you want to input the number of customer names you want to take. For our problem statement, it's 10. So we're going to see an input dialog that prompts you to enter the number of customers. Then it's going to build a data table. So initially, it builds a data table where when it extracts the data from the website, it's going to add to that data table. And then we are going to assign a current number for our loop. So here we are going to use a while loop. So while the current number is less than the number we have defined in the input dialog, it's going to keep executing. So until that condition is false, it's still going to continue executing. So it will click a button on the website, it will get the name, it will get the phone number, the birthday, and then it's going to, with every iteration, it's going to add a new row to the data table we defined earlier. Then it's going to increment the current number. Then it's going to write the data in that data table into an Excel file. Then finally, it's going to send that Excel file in an email. Then finally, it's going to delete that file from the project that you are in so that in the next execution, it finds a clean slate to work on. So I'll execute it in debug mode so that we can see how each activity executes. So it started, then it's prompted you to enter the number of customers. So from our problem statement, it was 10. So we'll enter 10 and then we click OK. So this is the input dialog. So now it's going to open the website. And it's going to highlight each element as it acts on it. So you can see it highlighted the generate button. So with every iteration, it clicks generate, which generates a random person. So it generates the details of a random person every time you click generate. And once it clicks generate and a random person is generated, the details, it's going to capture the name, and you can see it highlighting each one of them. So it's highlighting the name, clicking generate first. Then once the new profile has been generated, it highlights the name, captures it, stores it in a variable, highlights the phone number, captures it, stores it in a variable, the birthday, same case, stores it in a variable, then adds it in a new data row in the data table it had built initially. So at the end of the 10 iterations, the data table is going to have 10 records. And those 10 records are now going to be written into an Excel file, which will, at the end of the process, be sent to a certain user, which you're going to see shortly once the execution process is done. So it's iterating the number of times we had specified, that is 10. So it's getting the details of 10 customers, picking the name, the phone number, and the birthday, while writing it to a data table. And then eventually it's going to write it in an Excel file, then send it through email. So just to mention, in case you have any questions, you can type them in the chat section, and we're going to address each one of them towards the end of the session. So it's done executing each one of them. Now, you remember the execution trail option I talked about earlier? So that's what adds these checks. So with every successfully executed activity, it adds a check to it. So if a certain activity has failed to execute, it's going to have a different checker with a different color, indicating that this is where the error or the fault occurred. And in the output panel, we can see some information here. So when the bot started executing, you can see that the first piece of information you get here is that the debug process for the project name has started. So execution has started, and all this was being generated in real time. So the main executing, so with each executing activity, it gives you some real-time information that I am now executing this, I am now executing this, and so on and so forth, all the way to the end of the execution, which it finally tells you that the project execution ended and it shows you the amount of time it took to execute that particular project. So for our case, it took only three seconds and 3 minutes and 22 seconds. So the email that the bot sent once it completed is here. So the subject is hands-on exercise output. And then we have the attached file. Then we have some message in the message body. So if we open the Excel file, we find the 10 records that the bot extracted from the website and added to the Excel file. So ideally, a human being would take much longer doing each of these, and you see that the bot has only done it in 3 minutes. So that's how the execution of that process occurs. So that is running it in debug mode. If you run it without debugging, it would be much faster. It would literally take a few seconds. So debug mode helps you run it slowly. And you can see here we added slow step, we added execution trail. So for slow step, we reduced the speed to 4 times lower so that we can see how each activity is executing. So when you just run it the normal way, or when the bot is deployed and it runs normally, it's going to execute much faster in a matter of seconds. So that is that. So that was the problem statement for first hands-on practice. So maybe you can try that out at your own free time, and then you can send your response to my email, jeffdinganga@gmail.com. So just a different way how you implement it, because there are different ways of implementing that. That was just one way that you can solve that particular problem. So for a takeaway assignment, you can try and create a simple project which finds out whether a number entered by a user is either an even number or an odd number. So I've just given you a workflow or a flow chart over here, which you can use as a guide while building your process. So you need an input where the user enters a number, then the bot will check whether the number is even or odd based on a condition, then finally give an output. So once you manage to do this or implement this, you can send your response to my email. So yeah, time has far much gone, and come to the end of my presentation. So I'd like to invite any questions that or comments that you may have. So the floor is open for any questions that anyone may have. You can unmute and ask your question, or you can also type it in the chat section.
Any question, guys? And put it on chat. Okay, so the only question I can see on chat was Julius was having issues to download. Hopefully we'll be able to download and share. There's another question. Can you have the recording of the sessions? Yes, Patil. So this and all the series of the sessions will have the recording as well as the presentation available. So for this one, tomorrow it will be uploaded. Julius, can you get data from any website or some website? So Julius, yes, you are able to scrap majority of the websites. So there are scenarios whereby you can find a captcha. It is advisable that you do not, that's a security precaution to avoid bots, or a picture capture to avoid using the robots. So those are where you should not, but if there is none and there is no, let's say, an SMS token, verification token, you can be able to proceed. Julia, the presentation was awesome. Well done. Well done, Jeff. Well presentation. Okay, so probably I can just give a mention of the next presentation. Okay, so here is in the event you want additional information, you can be able to access it from the UiPath Academy. We will share with you this additional link together with the presentation, so that if you need to further gain understanding of the same, you'll be able to do so. So in the next session, which I would really encourage the team here to join, is that the next two. So the first one will be an introductory session on data manipulation. So here we're just going to learn how we can perform different manipulations from a data perspective. Then the second bit will be building further on it. So here we'll take the team through how you can use invoke functions in UiPath, so such that at any given time, if you have an SQL, if you have a Python script that you'd want to invoke, you can be able to do so directly from UiPath. So I'd really encourage that in the next 2 sessions, you should join. Then after that, the next 2 sessions, we'll have another one on data services. So data services here will be purely talking about how you can build, I can call it your mini database in UiPath Studio. And from there, you can do even the actual query. You can be able to just go to that. You can have your bots query from that database. And if an item is not there, it can even update that database. Then after that, we'll do exactly what Jeff has mentioned. We'll dive deeper into framework. So like he mentioned, this is enterprise used framework across when you're developing your processes. So we'll have a detailed deep dive on the same. Then once you have completed that, we have special surprises coming up. We have I know we'll be having document understanding here. We'll take the team through how you can be able to create bots that extracts information directly from the forms. Then from the forms, we try and push them to your systems or to your websites. And even hopefully we might even do a bit on machine learning, AI, so at least we give you a blend on the same. Then I know we have special surprises that will be coming up. So let me hold it from there, but we are keenly looking forward to seeing you in the next sessions. Okay, so is there any additional question that has been added? Can see from Alan. Well done, Jeff, for the wonderful presentation. There's another question from Kevin to know how do I get about downloading UiPath and setting it up. So yes, first, what Jeff took us through, he was able to show us those scenarios, but like I mentioned, we'll share with you the documentation. There's a step-by-step guide on how you can be able to set it up, which will support you. Yeah, I think the other ones we have responded, the team. Okay, so due to time, allow us to end it at that point. Thank you so much, Jeff, and we're looking forward to seeing everyone in the next subsequent session. You can also share with your friends and peers so that they can also join and learn. So we'll, like I mentioned, the first, you can see the first 5 emails that will be able to do that assignment and send back to Jeff. There's special surprises that we'll be giving away. So thank you so much, everyone. Bye, everyone.
Okay, bye-bye, everyone. Thank